The Garda probe into claims of clerical sex abuse at a Dublin hostel of horrors has made the headlines. We're talking about a boys' club that operated in Dublin in the 1960s and the 1970s, and it is alleged that essentially we're looking at an uncovered paedophile ring run by clerics. Joining me on the line is Fintan Dunne, journalist. Fintan, I have to say to you, first of all, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Angela.
Again, we're dealing with an alleged situation, which is important to emphasise, but talk to me about the current investigation that's going on.
Okay, well, in terms of the specifics of that investigation, ethically I'm not at liberty to discuss how long it's going on or what it entails or any other matters, but I can confirm the Sunday Mirror story by Sylvia Pownell that there is an investigation, and one arm of that investigation is looking at a boys' club in Eccles Street in Dublin, which was established in 1962 by Archbishop McQuaid. It was very much a pet project of Archbishop McQuaid, and indeed it died with him. Archbishop McQuaid died in 1973, and the boys' club closed some months later. It was supposed to be a halfway house for those who were in Artane or other industrial schools, to enable them to integrate into society. And it had 30 beds, 3 floors in number 64 Eccles Street, and nuns who were providing catering services and other services were housed in number 65. Archbishop McQuaid himself had offices at 63. So, in fact, these men will be between 65 and 75 now. And although some of them have been before, for example, the redress board, even before the redress board, many of them were unable to speak of these matters. They maintained that, in actual fact, this was set up for the purpose of subjecting them to predatory activity. They say that that was endemic, and the scale of it is truly astounding. We're talking about 30 beds would have had a turnover of around about 70 boys per annum over a period of 7 years or 10 years. So we're talking about 700 boys, perhaps. And of those, they say that so endemic was the abuse that perhaps 600 of those 700 were subjected to varying forms of abuse while they were in the hostel.
When you say they, I mean, who are we talking about?
Yes, we're talking about the victims who have now come forward and are anxious for their stories to be told, and we're happy to have their accounts published for the first time. And I think to many people would be surprised that this could have escaped our notice for so long. But bear in mind that when some of these individuals gave evidence in redress proceedings, that they were only covering industrial schools. And so things that happened outside of industrial schools were really not within the scope of those investigations. And one of the problems we've had with Irish governments tending to restrict things to names, locations, or specific instances is that things fall between the cracks. And this is a major thing to fall between the cracks, because there were hundreds of boys who were affected, and also hundreds of perpetrators, from seminarians who were visiting and interacting inappropriately with the boys to senior and a considerable number of convicted paedophile clerics had a presence in and around the hostel.
What sort of age group were these boys?
The boys would have been 15 to 18 years old, and by 18 years old they were moved out of the hostel and supposedly integrated into life. But of course, having gone through these experiences, many of them were unable to live any kind of life. The scale of the abuses to which they're subjected is the most worrying aspect of this, because the abuse wasn't just one or two opportunistic incidents here or there. This was systemic and systematic. Boys were abused on a weekly, if not some a bi-weekly basis. And those abuses were serious sexual assaults, very serious sexual assaults, on a bi-weekly or weekly basis. Your capacity to deal with that is very limited and survive it in a functional manner.
Sure.
And many of the boys who were there saw others, from accounts and from the stories coming forward, saw other boys literally turn to zombies before their eyes, unable to deal with the pressures which this was placing on them, and, if you like, under threat of being sent to reformatory school or back whence they came to perhaps worse circumstances, were they to protest or try and seek help.
I mean, I'm shocked. who wouldn't be? And from our point of view, it's limited what we can actually discuss, and I know that, and so do you. But from your perspective as a person who's very interested in human rights, but not human rights necessarily on a global scale, particularly for this country, what would you like to see happen here, Fintan?
Well, I'd love for a start for us to begin to talk about the Boys Club, because one of the most difficult aspects for the survivors of the Boys Club is that we're unaware of it, is that it doesn't ring like many other places ring and are redolent, because we know of abuses that occurred in them, and we know what happened in industrial schools, for example, the mere name Artane, and we all have a feeling and understanding for what happened. But for these victims coming forward now in these later years of life, they are still isolated. They still feel that they haven't had justice, and in many cases they haven't had actual justice where there's perpetrators who are still alive, and hopefully these are matters which will be addressed by the investigation. I hope they will come forward. I hope they will speak out, or at least pass information. They can get in touch with any Garda station and ask to be connected with the specialist unit investigating clerical offences. And they will be only too happy. Sensitive officers will deal with them. But also we have set up a Facebook group to coordinate perhaps even relatives of those in the 65, 75-year age bracket who might have been through industrial schools. Speak with them, ask them about Boys Club, were they through the Boys Club, and let's begin to speak about the experiences that they underwent there, hundreds of them. It can only encourage them to come forward and to begin to speak, and also for the first time send a signal to them that finally we care about what happened there to them.
Yeah, and I suppose for anybody who has been through any kind of trauma and abuse, one of the most important ingredients in recovery is acknowledgement and recognition and validation for what they have had to deal with. Fintan Dunne, as always, thank you very much for your time.
Much obliged, Angela.
Have a good day. Well, guys, what can I say to that?